All right, so welcome everybody, and this is the penultimate session, right? Second to the last. Next week we will meet on Tuesday, and then we'll be meeting on Thursday. So next week is the cleanup. Oh, I meant to ask you, Christy, and since you're right here, are you going to be coming down to West Virginia for Thursday's and Friday's session?
No, I have to figure out if I'm gonna be able to come to Marietta.
Oh, okay.
So, we're kind of working that out still.
Okay. All right, that's fine. Because yeah, the Marietta one, the next class that's scheduled is 13th and 14th. So that's obviously open to you. And then we'll have later ones if that doesn't work, but we can get you in there
Okay. Okay.
one way or the other.
Thanks, Jay.
Okie doke.
Hey, Jay,
Yeah.
you said that was next week, right? Whenever we come in and do our labs and take our exam.
Yeah, yours in Eastern West Virginia, it's the 10th and the 11th.
Okay, I'm gonna have to probably reschedule. I have I didn't even realize till right now. I have a conference in Rhode Island, and I leave at 7 o'clock on the 10th, and I'll be back until the 13th.
Okay, well, for you, Isaiah, you've actually been through the labs once.
Yeah, that is true.
So it's just a matter of taking the exam, and you can actually do that online.
Oh,
So you can do that independent of the session.
gotcha. I'll reach out and get some info on that from you.
Yeah, you'll have to coordinate that with ETA. There's a $14 fee for the online, but not a big deal.
Yeah, it's whatever.
Christy will loan it to you, so she'll. So, all right,
Gotcha.
yeah. So you got maximum flexibility there. If you hadn't done the labs, then you would have had a problem. So,
Thank you.
okay. So at this moment, everybody should be through into chapter 7. So check your status. Chapter 7 is the killer. That's the big chapter where everything sort of comes together. And so typically where people have concerns is once we get into chapter 7, you start getting into some of the math. How do you the typical math problems that we're dealing with are going to be calculating voltage drop, calculating array size and string size within the arrays, and calculating battery um, size of battery banks. So before I jump into anything, does anyone have a specific question that you've got from what you've been working at or looking at over the last week? Anybody? Nope. All right. So let me see. I'll go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to put it on. I'm not sure. I'm going to put it on speaker here so that the screen pops up properly in the recording. And there's the whiteboard. All right. So hopefully everybody can see the whiteboard. Is everybody able to see the whiteboard?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll just jump in. I'm going to do this randomly here unless somebody has specific questions. So one of the first questions you're going to run into is calculating voltage drop on a system. So you'll have to remember the voltage drop equation, and the voltage drop is voltage drop equals IMP or amps, and we use the amps at the maximum power point times amps times resistance times twice the distance divided by 1,000 feet. So that's going to be your voltage drop equation. Well, why did we do twice the distance? Well, it's because it's a circuit. So the wire goes there, the wire comes back. So if it's 200 feet, there's actually 400 feet of wire that's involved. Why did we use 1,000 feet? It's because the resistance number that we're given for wire from the NEC is in ohms per 1,000 feet. So we need to know what percentage of 1,000 feet this particular wire run is going to be. So really, if you discount the distance, this is just Ohm's law. V equals amps times resistance. Just standard old Ohm's law. So, so let's say we have a scenario. First thing you're going to have to do, if I want to, and this is very typical in a design. Let's say that I've got solar array over here, goes to a combiner box or a junction box. And then it goes to my DC disconnect. The DC disconnect is attached to my inverter. This is a grid tied system. So that's very typical. The DC disconnect, it's got to be within 10 feet of the inverter. But normally in today's market, the DC disconnect is actually connected to the inverter. And then from the inverter, now we're in the AC portion of the system. So we're going to go to an AC disconnect. That's got to be located outside within 10 feet of the electric meter. So from the AC disconnect, we're going to go to our service panel. And then from the service panel, going to go out to the meter. So that's a really typical grid-tied system. Well, what is the long piece of wire in this system? It's usually from the junction box or the combiner box up on the roof, for example, to the inverter. And the inverter might be in the basement. So you measure the distance of that conduit run. And that conduit run, let's say in this example, you measured it and it's 87 feet, just to pick a random number. One thing I should note is the NEC says that for DC wire, and in this system as I've drawn it, this is DC. If it's running inside a building or on top of the building, it's got to be in metal conduit. You cannot put it in PVC. You can't put it in liquid tight. It's got to be in metal. It can be MC cable, metal clad cable, and that's what most people end up using just because it's easier to run than bending all of that EMT conduit. But it's got to be in metal. I don't have a good reason for that. It's just what the code says. All right, so under this scenario, let's say that I'm using number 10 wire, and I want to know how much voltage I'm going to lose over this distance. Well, the first thing I need to know is how many amps are going through this. Well, if this happens to be a string of, let's just say 12 panels, and it's just one single string, I'll look at the panel itself, and it's going to say the IMP has a certain value. And let's say for this, it happens to be 9.1 amps. So that's the IMP. The theoretical maximum amperage for that panel is going to be the ISC. But for voltage drop, we're not worrying about theoretical maximums, and we don't have to put in times 1.25, you know, the NEC safety margin. We're trying to deal with what is the actual voltage drop. And it's going to be operating at IMP. So I'm going to take 9.1 amps. I'm going to look up in the NEC to see what is, or in the National Electrical Code, what is the ampacity or the resistance rating for 10 gauge wire. So in your book, I've got that table reproduced. And I figured I'd just grab it here and see. I don't remember what page it is. It's right around page 100. Let's see, the ampacity table's on page 104. So maybe it's in page 80 something. Does anybody know offhand? Here it is. Page 84. Yeah, looks like 84. So 10 gauge wire stranded is 1.24. So if you just look that up on page 84 in your table, you're going to find that it's 1.24 ohms. So 1.24 ohms. I can always have trouble drawing the ohm symbol. So that's the resistance, but now we got to do twice the distance divided by 1,000 feet. So twice 87 is going to be 174 divided by 1,000 feet. Or that's just going to go to 0.174. All right, so we take 9.1 times 1.24. 9.1 times 1.24 times 0.174. And that's saying that we are losing 1.96 volts. All right, is that acceptable? Well, I don't know. Is it? I could figure out what the voltage of my system is right now. Let's assume that these are 300 watt panels. So I know that the IMP times the IMP or the VMP is going to be 300. So I can take 300 divided by 9.1, and that means that my VMP is 32.96 volts. Does everybody see how I got that number? If I'm just randomly saying these are 300 watt panels. Well, 300 watt panel, volts at the maximum power point times amps at the maximum power point is going to give me the maximum power point wattage, which is 300 watts. So I said that there were 12 panels and they're all in one string. So 32.96 times 12, that's going to get me 12, 395 volts, looks like 395.6. All right, so under standard test conditions, this array should be generating 9.1 amps and 395 volts. So I lose 1.96 volts. So in this case, my voltage drop is going to be 1.96 over 395.6. And that's going to be not a lot. Divided by 395.6. 0.0049 equals 0.0049, or when we convert that to percentage, it's 0.49%. So over the course of that distance, I'm losing about 0.5% due to voltage drop. We try and limit our voltage drop to 2% or so. So we're fine. If I was really doing a voltage drop equation, I would also want to add in all of these other shorter runs. But the distance here, this might be 12 feet. This might be, 12 feet. It's going outside. It's coming back. It's just on one side of the wall. These distances are not going to be that great. So, realistically, it's usually just this PV output circuit that we're worried about. Because it's the long run. So if the voltage drop were too high, which it's not in this instance, what do we do? What are the things we typically will do? I'll just ask you guys. I'm seeing a whiteboard there. Okay, it's supposed to be interactive, so I'm gonna ask for a response.
increase the system size, add panels?
If the voltage drop is too great, that would be if the amount of power needs to be expanded, if you need more power. So voltage drop, you've got some options. One option would be increase the voltage of the system. So in your case, if I did add more panels in the string up to whatever, I could go up to 600. That would increase my production, but it would also increase my voltage. So the same voltage drop will occur. I'll still be losing 1 point something volts, but it's a smaller percentage because the voltage has increased. The other thing we typically do, and this is the normal response, is you just put in bigger wire. You know, if you're losing too much voltage, you put in bigger wire. The only downside of that is that it adds to the cost of the system. It can add significantly. So bigger wire, increase the voltage size, shorten the distance. That's an option, but often you want that to be the option anyway. You want all your distances to be as short as possible. And then the other one is to use better wire. But typically your only choices are going to be copper versus aluminum, and you're going to be using copper regardless.
Isn't there the other probability, say it's a roof mounted system, right? And they mounted it directly and it didn't use the space, it's increasing the heat of the system. So if they made sure that it was off the roof by a little bit, gives it that airflow, reduces the temperature of the PV cells and then array, and then it can also affect the voltage. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. The increased heat will increase the resistance as well. So you do want to raise it up off the roof. You would also want to run it under your solar panels in the shade. Keep it out of
Oh, the
direct-
wiring, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So those are all issues that you can do. You want, and if it's a run where you're burying it in the ground, that's actually going to help too, because that actually moderates the temperature even more so.
Would the inverter location in the system matter, where you switch over from AC to DC? So if you have DC running down to the inverter, then going to AC versus AC coming from the top of the roof?
Yeah, normally not. A lot of people think that, but it's really just what is the voltage. So if it's, in fact, in many cases, your DC system is going to be operating at a higher voltage than your AC. So it might be better to keep your inverter as far away from the array as possible, because then the voltage for the longest run is going to be at a maximum. But that's kind of a carryover from the days when people were installing 12 volt or 24 volt or 48 volt systems. And so they would just assume the DC was at a lower voltage than the AC, because the AC is typically going to be either 120 or 240. If it's grid tied, it's typically going to be 240. So, yep, but it doesn't, the resistance is the same whether it's AC or DC. You know, you calculate it exactly the same way.
Gotcha.
Okay. All right. So I think voltage drop, pretty straightforward. Let me jump in and try another. Let's do an array size. See if this still lets me. Yeah, it's going to start with a blank screen. That's good. Okay, so so if we talk about a array, well, sizing an array, this is another very typical math question that we're going to be dealing with. So what are the things you need to know before you can size an array? Well, at its core, you need to know what you're wanting to run. You know, what's the load? What's the load demand? So oftentimes they'll often ask me, you know, how big does an array need to be? I was like, I don't know. You know, what are you running? So let's assume that it's a national average. So I don't know, it varies. I'd have to look it up, but it's in the neighborhood of what, 940 kilowatt hours per month. Is that right?
Something like that. I know it varies by state, but
Yeah, somewhere in there. I don't remember if this is an old number. It's 900, 930, somewhere between there. All right, so let's just say that our usage is 940 kilowatt hours per month. Well, the first thing we need to know is we need to get this to the daily load because the sun rises and sets on a daily basis. So we need to know how much power we're using in a day. Well, what I normally do is just divide this by 30.5 days per month. You could use 30, you could use 31, except if you're in February. So I just use 30.5. It gives you a little bit more exact number. So under this scenario, if I say 940 divided by 30.5, and I'm getting 30.8, 30.82. Is everybody else following along? 30.82 kilowatt hours per day. Okay, so we've reduced this down. This is our load demand. So what's the next step? I'll wait for someone to jump in. I want to get this from kilowatt hours per day to kilowatts. So what do I divide this by? Oh, come on, guys, don't be shy.
24.
24, you're saying hours per day?
Well, you want kilowatt hours, right?
No, I just want kilowatts.
Oh, so right now you got kilowatt hours per day.
Yeah, I've got kilowatt hours per day, but I need to get it to kilowatts. So logically, I would divide it by hours per day, right? But it's not going to be 24 hours a day.
Oh,
It's going to
because
be,
it's the amount of time the sun's out, right?
yeah, the amount of insolation. So I would look up, I'd look up on PV watts, and I would plug in the orientation of my array, the angle of the roof, and I would find that for that location, I have X number of hours of insolation per day, right? So in this example, let's just assume I've done that, and it comes back and I have 4.09 hours per day of insolation. Well, the hours per day cancel. So now I'm going to take 30.82 divided by 4.09, and I get 7.53. 7.53 what? Well, it's going to be kilowatts, right? So if my system were 100% efficient, I would need a 7.53 kW system for this house. But it's not going to be 100% efficient. So what do I have to do?
Oversize your system by a ratio or percentage.
Yeah, what is that percentage known as?
Oh boy.
It's basically we derate it. We derate it by the inefficiencies. So what would normally be things that are going to be derating? If I start out at 100% efficient, now I've got to take out my inverter. The inverter has an inefficiency. Let's say that's 3%. And then there might be some shading. So I've calculated my shading, and let's say that's 5%. And then I've calculated voltage drop, and that's 2%. And then maybe I know that I live in a dusty area. It doesn't rain as much as it should. So let's just say another 2% for soiling, for dust, and so on. And since this was a string inverter problem, you know, panels have plus or minus 5%, you know, plus or minus, like if it's made on a Monday, it's going to work 5% less well than if it's made on a Thursday, for example, probably, you know, who knows? So, but if it's plus or minus 5% in a string situation, whatever the lowest common denominator is, that's where it's going to be performing. So if it's plus or minus 5%, then that means my string is minus 5%. So that would be just simply compatibility issues. So let's say that's all of my D rate. Well, I've got 10, 17%. So my system is now only going to be 83% efficient. Everybody see how we do that? So at this point now, it's an 83% efficient. So I'm going to divide that by 0.83. So I take my 7.53, divide it by 0.83, and I need a 9.07 kW array. That's how you size the array. So it's a pretty straightforward process. You simply take your daily load, which is this, divide it by the hours of insolation, and then derate it by the efficiency of the system. So it's just 3 steps. Daily load, divided by the hours of insolation, divided by the system efficiency. So if I talk about how did I get my my daily load, let's see if I can, you guys get to see my schedule here, huh? Okay, oh yeah, I see over here. All right, so if I'm wanting to look at put that over there because I think that's the screen you're seeing. Are you guys seeing Firefox?
Yep.
Okay, so if I look at PV watts, so we go in here and let's say we go to Moorfield. So you're going to plug in the location. And for this calculation, we don't need to know the size of the array. It always plugs in 4 kW just kind of automatically. But at the moment, I'm just trying to figure out what is my hours of insolation. So let's say that I measure the roof angle and it turns out it's 23 degrees. And I look at the azimuth, and the azimuth is slightly off south. So let's say it's about 160 degrees. Well, those are the only 2 numbers I need to plug in. And now it's telling me that under that scenario with no shading, it's 5.5 or 4.57. So that's my hours of insolation. I can play around with this, and I do this quite a lot if I'm trying to do an analysis. It's telling me that under that scenario, it's going to generate 4,977 kilowatt hours per year. And if you're doing an analysis, and let's say that we decided that our solar array, we had already figured it was what, 930 a month? So 930 kilowatt hours a month times 12 gives me 11,016. So it's a little more than double. So I could go back here and I could say, well, all right, let's try 9 kW system, 11,195. Well, that's where we ended up. So I didn't have to do all that calculation. So this is telling me that's the size based on, this is my D rate factor right here, 14.08. I think we figured it was 17. So if I put in 17, it's actually going to reduce that down below. So I think that's why we ended up having to go to like a 9.1 to get back up to the 11,016. Still a little less. So these things always vary slightly from where you end up in your calculations. So anyway, that's an interesting use of this particular tool to just play around. You can jump back and forth on it. All right, so hopefully you guys had an opportunity to use PV watts, play around with that. So any questions about array sizing? Yep. Okay, so then let's do a battery bank sizing. I'm trying to just hit the ones that I know people have trouble with. The math problems, the dreaded math problems. All right, so how do we do a battery bank size? Well, one of the things that I found is, at least for me, the hardest part of this is how do you get started? You know, with the solar array, I just say, okay, I'm going to start out with my daily load, and it's going to be in kilowatt hours per day, and I want to get to kilowatts. So I got to divide by hours per day. Well, what hours per day? Hours of insolation, not 24 hours. All right, I divide by that, and that gives me it if it's 100% efficient. It's not 100% efficient, so I got a D-rate. Those are the steps there. Well, for battery, we start again with our daily load. So let's say that we want our battery bank system to handle, if I recall, it was what, 31 point, let's just say 2 kilowatt hours per day. So we want a full house battery backup, sort of like what Christy is looking at, you know, up there. You're going to be more efficient than this, but let's just say it's a big house, suburban home, full electric load, average. We want a battery backup. So I'm starting with the daily load, 30.2 kilowatt hours per day. Well, in this case, I want to get to amp hours. So how do I get to amp hours? Well, to get from watts to amps, you divide by volts. So assuming that my battery bank is 48 volts, I'm going to take 31.2 kilowatt hours, or that's 31,200 watt hours divided by 48, and that's going to give me 650 amp hours. Everybody with me so far? Just nod silently behind your blacked out screen. There you go. Or a thumbs up or whatever. All right, so that gives us part of the thing. What that's saying is basically, if I could use the entire battery, and if I only needed 1 day of autonomy, and if my system was 100% efficient, I would need a 650 amp hour battery. But I know that that's not the case, right? And I'm not going to be able to use the whole thing. So let's say that you're using a lead acid battery to a 50% depth of discharge. So I'm only going to be able to use half of it. So you divide this by 0.5, and in this case, it's the same as doubling it. It's going to be 1,300 amp hours. And let's assume I want, just to make it interesting, a day and a half of autonomy. You know, I think I might have to go a day and a half. So I'm going to say autonomy days. So I'm going to take 1,300 times 1.5, which is going to be 1,950 amp hours. Okay. And then I'm going to need to derate it by efficiency. Well, in my system, let's say I've got my standalone system. So here we're going to a junction box or a combiner box. From here, we're going to go to our DC disconnect. From there, we're going to go to a charge controller. From the charge controller, we go to our battery bank. From our battery bank, we go up to our inverter. And from the inverter, we're going to go to our loads. right? This is a standalone system. Well, we're sizing the battery, and I just need to know the only thing between the battery and the load is the inverter. So I derate this by the inverter's efficiency. So in this case, if I look up on the spec sheet and I find out that the inverter is 96% efficient, I am going to derate this by 0.96. And now it's going to be 1950 divided by 0.96, or 2031. So at this point, I need a 2031 amp hour system, battery bank. And it's going to be 48 volts, right? My system is 48 volts. So what kind of battery do I need? Well, this is a big system. So let's go online. And let's see, where's my, there it is. Share that again. And let's say large, deep cycle. Let's do some shopping. The internet's being slow here. All right, so in this case, this is a 12 volt, 200 amp hour. This one here looks like, see what it is. Oh, this is a cranky. I don't think this is deep cycle. No, it says cold cranking. So that's not helpful. Here's a deep cycle, 12 volt, 200 amps. That's the same one. Just looking for a bigger battery. This is lithium.
Those.
Yep.
Is a 48 volt, 280 amp hour battery.
48 volt. Where is that?
That's the AG4 Power Pro.
You said AG4?
AG4. Sorry, G4. Oh, there it was. Scroll down. It's that second row there. Yeah. It's that battery.
Yeah. Is this lithium ion though?
It is the iron phosphate, lithium iron phosphate.
Oh, okay. It is lithium. Yeah. I just wanted to do a lead acid
Oh, got it. Okay.
just because it's for these it's a better example. All right, so I'll just jump in. Nope, that's lithium too. I just clicked on a lithium. This is deep cycle, AGM. All right, so we'll just pick this one just for the heck of it. All right, it's a 200 amp hour battery and it's 12 volts and it's about 400 bucks. And the question is, how much does it weigh? It's going to take a while for it to paint. Oh, it's going to give me a deal. Lots of sales stuff. Can't get to the spec sheet yet, huh? Specs, here we go. All right, 200 amp hour, 12 volt, and it weighs 128 pounds. So we're not going to be carrying that around a lot. So how many of these are we going to need? Well, the first thing you need to know is how many strings. So it's 200 amp hours, and we calculated that we needed, how much was it? 2031, right? So that's not an exact measurement. So let's just say 10. So we need 10 strings of these. And how many in a string? Anybody want to venture a guess? If Christy, you're muted there if you're talking. Okay. All right. So anyway, it's a 12-volt system, or it's a 48-volt system. This is a 12-volt battery. So we need 4 of them in a string. And we need 10 strings. So we need 40 batteries at 128 pounds each. So 5,000 pounds of batteries in your living room, right? In your spare bedroom. So this was one of the problems with lead acid batteries. I mean, they're just big, they're heavy, they're expensive. Because this thing here was $400, not even counting the shipping. So $400 times 40, you're talking $16,000 worth of batteries. So now the good thing with, so this is how you size a lead acid battery. Well, in today's world, typically what we're dealing with is, if I say solar battery, well, we calculated our system, we had 30 kilowatt hours per day, more or less. So the way you would size a system with lithium ion is, if I need 30 kilowatt hours in a day, and let's say I want to put in a Tesla Powerwall. So I just look at the Tesla Powerwall, and the Tesla Powerwall 2 here has, if I recall, it's like 13 kilowatt hours. Let's see, yeah, 13.5 kilowatt hours. So if I put in 2 of them, it's going to be 27, probably pretty close to the 30 that I need for one day. If I want a day and a half, maybe I've got to get 3 of them. So I hook up 3 of those, and that's really all the calculations I need. Well, 2 of them is still $16,000. So the battery bank is still pretty expensive. But at least we're not putting in, 5,000 pounds of battery. Here we're putting in about 500 pounds of battery. Still a lot, but it's not going to break your floor joists or things like that. So, and this is what we talk about when we say lithium is much more energy dense. In this case, we're getting 10 times the power for the same, for the same weight. So that's significant. So everybody see how we do that with lead acid batteries. You take the daily load, you divide it by the system voltage. You then figure out what's the depth of discharge. Then you calculate how many days of autonomy I want. And then you derate that based on the inverter's inefficiency, and you end up with your battery bank size. With lithium ion, it's already done all of those calculations for you. All you have to do is just say, what's my daily load? What's the load in kilowatt hours I want to service? And then we just find the rating for that battery. So, make sense?
Yep.
Good. All right. If your brain's not ready to fry just yet, I'll try one more here. And this is the one that usually makes people crazy. is when you talk about string calculations. So this is where you're going to be told, okay, what's the maximum and what's the minimum that I can put in a string? So let's say that we've got an array, and it's got 22 panels in the array, and I want to know how many strings. How many strings can I do here? Let's see if I can do this process by memory here. So what is it going to worry about? Well, basically, with this calculation, we're going to be going to a junction box. From here, this is a simple grid-tied system. We're going to go to our DC disconnect. The inverter is right here. And then we're going to go to an AC disconnect. And then to our service panel. Okay. And then from the service panel, it's going to go out to the meter. I want to know how to configure this. I've already determined I need 22 panels. Well, if I knew what the voltage of the maximum voltage of each panel, and I knew what the capacity of the inverter is, it would be a pretty straightforward thing. So let's just say that the maximum voltage for this inverter is 600 volts DC. Fairly common, right? Because the maximum for a residential system is 600 volts. And I look at my solar panel and I find that it is 32.4 VOC. Well, the VOC is the open circuit voltage. That's the theoretical maximum voltage. So if this were the case, I could just simply say, all right, well, what's 600 divided by 32.4? And I could get 600 divided by 32.4, and I get 18.51. And then I would round down and I'd say 18 panels max. But that would be wrong. Why? Well, logically, and I want to show you the wrong answer because I think it helps you logically to figure out how we go about this. So I'm saying, okay, if I hooked them up in a string and if I hooked up 18, I would still be under 600 volts. That would be fine. Well, one of the things we've got to do is we've got to calculate the margin of safety. So let me see. No, that's for wire size. Okay, I'm going to confuse you there. But the thing that affects it is going to be temperature. Okay, the colder it is, the more voltage this system will produce.
I think so.
Somebody have a comment there?
Maybe the weather got to him.
Yep. Okay. All right. So what would I do? I would take. I need to
He'll be
adjust
back.
this for temperature.
Jay, we lost you at margin of safety.
Oh, okay. It just showed me my internet was unstable. Am I back? Am I back
Hello?
in? Whoop.